Hi, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jared Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On today's episode, I talk to the designer, writer, typographer, publisher, and general design polymath, Peter Bil'ak. My first introduction to Peter and his work was through the magazine he co-founded in the early 2000s with Stuart Bailey that really featured some of the most interesting writing in and around design from that era. That magazine has come up often in this podcast and was really an early influence on my own interest in design writing and design discourse. David Reinfert joined the magazine later, who I interviewed a few months ago, and that episode actually makes a really good companion episode to this one, I think. Peter and I talked about the founding of and his newer magazine, Works That Work, as well as how he started writing about design. We talked about shifting design criticism and the way we write about design away from the perspective of the maker and to the perspective of the user, and the general sort of perception around design magazines and culture right now. And then we also talk about what he's learned recently from making his first documentary film. So as you can see, we cover quite a bit. I talked to Peter last month over Skype from his studio in the Netherlands, and it was right in the middle of a really busy day at the studio, so you can hear some talking in the background as people come and go, and the sound does get a little hard to hear a little bit in the middle, but I had so much fun talking to Peter and found this conversation so interesting that I still just kind of wanted to share it and share his insights with you. So I really appreciate Peter taking the time out of his busy day to chat about these things. So thank you to Peter, and I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Peter Bil'ak. I was thinking about you and about talking to you today, and I was struggling with exactly how I wanted to start the conversation because you do so many different types of things. But I'm pretty sure I first came to your work probably about 10 years ago through actually. And so I discovered your work first as a writer, editor, publisher, before I kind of ever saw any of your design work or your type design work. And so I was curious for you, kind of what came first in your career? Was it design or writing, editing, publishing?
I don't know. I think I first learned to speak and write. And I studied design later.
Okay.
But quite early on, I realized that, especially because I was interested in typography, the typography and language are related. It's the typography makes the language visible, and so I was interested not only in the formal aspect of typography, but also in the other side of type, and that it captures content. And I did care about the content. So while most typographers see text as the kind of the gray area and a gray block which they kind of place somewhere on the page, I was pretty careful on what I work with, and I think I started writing quite early on as well, probably before I designed my first fonts. So,
oh, really?
Simultaneously, yeah. I found it very hard. I found both very hard, writing and designing type. I became slightly better at type. Writing, it took longer, to become comfortable with. But it was sorting out ideas. It was sorting out, I did enjoy the fact that you're clarifying your thoughts and it actually reflects on your practice. So I did find immediately the connection, and I think and reinforce the practice. It was not disconnected. It was really going in parallel.
Yeah. And how did you, I think it's so interesting that it was so early in your career that you were kind of doing both of them. How did you discover that writing was this way to supplement your design work, or that it was a way to reflect on it so early in your career?
Somehow I became involved with magazines.
Okay.
Back in, I was born in Czechoslovakia. there was a new design magazine starting, and they asked me to write something. Actually, it had to do with my thesis. I was writing my thesis as a student, and they ended up publishing it. So I think that's probably the first kind of serious writing where it came from. And then, it's whatever you do, you get more of it. So
Right.
because I was writing a thesis and it was published in the form of a book, other people have seen it. They saw it as a reflection on practice. So I was asked by other magazines to write. So pretty soon, I was getting equal amount of questions to design stuff as to write stuff for the magazines, especially because there are not that many people who write. So I was writing book reviews, and I enjoyed them very much. Again, like kind of as a way of slow reading. Usually I read very fast, and I'm not very careful about this. I don't make notes and suddenly like that. Read a lot slower and figure out what this thing is actually about. So I did enjoy writing book reviews for different magazines. I think I wrote some for Print, some for iMagazine, some for local Dutch magazines.
Yeah.
And some of them led to big, longer essays. And I think that's how I met Stuart Bailey, with whom I started.
Yeah.
He was pretty much the same. He wrote short essays, longer essays, and I remember having a drink with him and saying how disillusioned we were sometimes to find our writing in a magazine, and how different it was to see them designed. That there was this connection between designing the article and writing it. And because we were primarily designers, we felt like there should be a publication which cares as much about writing as it cares about designing.
Yeah.
And at the time, this was like in late 90s, early 2000s, we thought that there are two kind of magazines: really strictly academic ones which didn't care too much about how they look, and portfolio-based ones which they all care about looks, and there was not much else, which is along with captions and immediately thought like, we should start a magazine that does exactly this.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
I mean, you set up exactly what the next thing I wanted to talk about was ... And I'm curious kind of how and you started answering this a little bit, but how did you approach it? I don't know exactly how to phrase this. Did you approach it primarily as a designer, or were you thinking about it as a writer, since you had been doing writing? How were you thinking about kind of what this thing was when you first were launching it?
No, it was clearly we were designers. Both of us, and actually there was a third person as well, Jürgen, a German fellow, who was involved. And we were designers. There was no doubt about this. And the reason why we started it was that we realized that the definition of design, as we found in other magazines, was so much more limited than actual work. That we were interested in broadening the discussion, especially because at the time I was designing a lot of books, and graphic design profession works like you impersonate or you become a temporary expert in these things. So if I'm working on a book about architecture, I become temporarily expert in architecture. And if next project is about something else, music, then you start finding out a lot more about music. So every month it was a different project, and every month I was learning something new. So my profession was anything but graphic design. It was really like jumping from subject to subject. But then if we found the design magazines, they were kind of presenting the vision of design that we did not recognize. So we felt like if we were going to make publication, it would be anything but. It would be graphic design would be kind of ghost discipline, a parasite which attaches to other subjects, and that's how we were always doing it. We talking a lot about film and music, literature and whatever, translation. Because this is what practice was about.
Yeah, I remember reading an interview. It may have been with you and Stuart actually, about thinking about ... and it being a design magazine, and then something where you wanted to include something else, and you were like, is this the type of content that would be in a design magazine? And you were like, well, if we put it in the magazine, then yeah, I guess it is. And there was a reviewer who said something about ... is less a magazine or a publication about design, but from design, which I thought was a really nice kind of way to think about it, is that you're kind of approaching all of these subjects, kind of approaching these subjects from design. And I'm kind of curious about being a designer who also writes, kind of what you learned. What skills does a designer bring to text, and then vice versa? What, as being a writer, how has that influenced your design work?
Well, writing is organizing thoughts, and one way or the other, you need to sort out these thoughts in any project, anything you do, because you want to make it presentable. And designers, for some reason, they think less about public when they design stuff, and when you're writing, it's immediate, it's clear. You're not writing for yourself. It's not really self-expression.
Right.
There are actual readers that will read it, and they will try to extract some value from this. And in design, the discussion about self-expression and it's about your work makes it kind of ambiguous. What your role is, who are you doing it for?
Right.
So in writing, I think it was clear. Writing is communication, same like graphic design is communication. So I think it improved my skills to communicate. It improved my ways of how to make the points, how to organize, how to deliver complicated points. And I did, of course, the running ... was a huge learning lesson, and because we didn't know all that much about running a magazine, or not that much about editing at all. If I look at the old it's terrible. I have to say that the level of editing was very poor, and we didn't know what to do with it. So we asked all our friends who wrote, and we received pieces of text. We didn't dare to touch it, so it was a lot of different voices, and some of it made sense, some not. And today I would have never done anything like this. Today I feel a lot more responsibility, that I'm trying to make sure that if you do publish something, there is a point why you're doing it.
Right.
Before, I was probably sometimes mesmerized by complexity. Because sometimes I thought, oh, this thing is so complex, I don't even understand it. It's probably good. And it's a really beginner's kind of mistake. That you're too much afraid to engage with writing with text. So this is something that slowly I become comfortable with this. And with Works at Work, I try to kind of build on it. I do think the level of editing is much better than with the previous one.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious. You were, again, kind of set up what I was thinking about. I was curious about the connections that you saw between Works at Work and ... if there are any, and then also how you approached Works at Work differently, or kind of what you learned from ... to make Works at Work what it is.
Well, again, it's the time that makes it easier to be critical. Right now I have a sufficient distance from ... so I'm very critical towards the publication.
Right.
And when I meet someone at a conference and tell me I really like that magazine, I go, why? What? Why on earth would you like that? There are a lot of things. Well, there are some interesting materials, but overall I see more problems with this.
Interesting.
Half of it, which is there, I think should not have been published. It was just kind of too. Yeah, I mean, with Works at Work, I don't see this way yet. Maybe I will in the future.
Right.
There's one or two pieces which I think they are not as succeeded, but in overall, I think we managed to bring individual pieces to the standard of the magazine. So they're not huge differences. They're all thoroughly researched. We know what we're trying to deliver, and once you know why you ask people to write, once you know why you're doing it, it becomes a lot easier to answer the question of how long should it be. What are the important points, and we consider readers a lot more. it's not trying to impress people with vocabulary, something that dot sometimes did. It was just so impenetrable. It was kind of a, it
Yeah.
was dense. It was so arty in a way that there's a mystique around it that if you
Right.
don't understand, that's good because if there's you're not supposed to understand fully arts. With work is the opposite. It's trying to invite, it's trying to explain, it's trying to be. It's very down to earth. It's very conversational. It's very much.
Yeah.
You sit down with someone and you have a chat. It's a lot more kind of perhaps lower in a way that it speaks to everyone. It's not elitist.
That's
Uh,
interesting. Yeah. Do you have a sense of audience for these things? Whether it's dot 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 or works at work, who were the readers, or who were the actual readers, and then who were your kind of imagined readers, or who did you want to be consumers of these?
Well, with dot 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 again, we are naive and we have no idea about
Yeah.
it. We focus fully on making it, and then when the point came that we had to print it, we had no idea how many to print. 100,000, 10,000. Who might want to read it? We had no idea.
Oh,
It was
interesting.
it's not something we thought about. Uh, and only when we start kind of dealing with distribution that we figure out that there are actual people who will have to pay for it
Right.
uh, and at the end, it was read a lot by graphic design students,
Yeah.
which which is not something we intended at all. But I think it kind of filled the gap and possibly presenting alternatives. And it was early days of kind of indie magazine,
Yeah.
so I think that's why may have been attractive. It was kind of a different voice. Um, but it was never, like our intention to fill this gap. It was never kind of aiming to go there. It just happened because there are not so much things. There was not much self-publishing these days. With Works at Work, it's different. There was a clear idea what I wanted to do, and that is that there's a promise of design that design is relevant to people. This is what designers love talking about. About how design can improve our lives, and at the same time, designers fail to speak to wider public. They love speaking in jargon. They love speaking in blogs for these other designers. They love making reviews of other designers' work. But you rarely find these relevant design discussions in daily papers
Yep.
or in non-specialized blogs or in talking about functions of what design should be doing. So this was kind of attempt to get out of the bubble. It's not designers write about other designers' work and reviewed by other designers, but let's kind of go on on the lowest level and let's see it through the eyes of the user. Let's see it through the eyes of people who use design. So we never kind of use the perspective of the maker, but the other way around.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then in this way, it becomes a lot simpler because then we can actually evaluate how functional or things are. We look at the impact of design rather than, and it becomes a lot easier to define what we're looking for because we're looking at actual ideas that impact our lives, that do have this positive improvement,
Right.
um, and not just something people claim, but something that okay, let's go on the ground, see, let's speak to people and see what makes a difference.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so much, I feel like that's so much of what I'm thinking about as I'm kind of talking to these people, is talking to people for this podcast and for my kind of thesis project is, what is the role of design criticism, or what is the role of having a kind of rich discourse around design? And I've found that so much of it, is very inward looking. And I'm wondering, how do how does one talk about design in the world for people who are not designers to kind of understand the consequence of it, and not out of a insecurity of like, look how important our job is, but how does this kind of influence the world? How do you think about that, and how did the magazine think about that, of kind of talking about these things as things that actually affect how we interact with each other, with the world, with devices?
Um, Well, there is a change. I spoke briefly about self-expression, which has been
Hmm.
something very much considered like a decade or more ago. And people start seeing like that the design might be something wider. They start thinking of the social impact of design, and more and more you see that there's more discussion about sustainability,
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
social aspect of design. But there's been a lot of misunderstanding as well. There's a lot of nonsense made
Right.
in that direction. There's a lot of people who are trying to make some fantastic design objects for rural Africa, and they make, I
Right.
don't know, they make some kind of a concept of, I don't know, of a dwelling for
Yeah.
Africa, and it's a beautiful proposal. But then it's never used. It's never implemented. It doesn't have any consequences. It doesn't consult with people. And it's presented in magazines as something revolutionary. And in Works of Word, what we try to look is like, well, we ignore all these because these are kind of unproven concepts. We were interested to see it much later, like again, from the user perspective, not from the maker perspective. Because from the maker, everything is fantastic. Every maker can make an amazing contribution. If you look at from the user perspective, we realize like they go like, well, why are you coming here? What are you bringing? And how does it improve my life? And that's why we ended up reporting on all things. Well, I think there's too much obsession with novelty
Right.
and being the first one to report on it. And the media, of course, feeds from this. Trying to be the first to report and stuff. And then it's not very sexy to go back and see what happens with these things
Right.
5 years, 10 years later. Same like in science, there's not much money to go and replicate on experiments or proving if something is valuable or invalid. In design, the obsession with novelty kind of ignores the relevance
Hmm.
of what things actually mean. And that's why we decided to be slower. The decision to do 2 issues a year also shows that we don't really care about reporting on time-sensitive things.
Yeah.
Ideally we'd make it once a year, but then it's not almost a magazine anymore. So like a twice a year is kind of like a minimal kind of frequency to do it. But still, we choose basically overlooked old things and trying to and I don't think we've ever kind of came up with something latest because there's not enough to talk about it. Again, there's only description of the author and his intentions, and then you end up doing profiles of someone and celebrating
Right. Right.
something which is not real. So the reality is like again, how is it interwoven in fabric of
Yeah.
life? In different places. And because we understand design as something very wide, that anything that is produced by man is design, and we don't discriminate in looking at the price tag of object or education of the
Right.
object or geographic location of it. Anything is kind of considered. Yeah. So the impact of it is the only criterion.
Right.
And none of the other things which often differentiate design shoes. They're very expensive, and
Yeah.
if they're cheap, then they are kind of normal shoes. So we kind of remove this and suddenly we just confront an object and see what it actually means to people.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's so. I love. I just love that kind of philosophy, and I'm curious. What do you think? What are the subjects or the topics or the kind of issues that are underreported or under talked about, kind of within and around the design community right now? What are the things that kind of need a spotlight turned to them?
Well, it's not what I mentioned.
Yeah.
Because people kind of realize that not being elitist has not being appreciated, and sustainability
Hmm.
and looking at developing world. There's been so many projects. I've seen so many projects of designing special lights for India.
Right.
I've seen maybe 10 of those.
Right.
And again, I see it and go like, well, show me, how, show me what happens with it, 2 years later, and
Yeah.
then we can have a discussion. And you never see them again.
Right.
They're kind
Right.
of shown and never followed up. And so I wish there was something like this that before you report on it, you actually find out how it works. And a lot of the writing happens without confronting the reality of it. It's based on republishing press releases, getting things from the authors, getting PR materials. So I wish people slow down, which is missing because again, it maybe has to do with the mechanics of publishing. It's just cheaper to get it directly from makers. And if you want to do it from the other way around, you have to do the work yourself.
Right. Do you see your work or your writing or even your publishing as a form of criticism or a design criticism? Or how do you kind of approach it or think about that kind of publishing output?
We don't. Well, with Works at Word, I don't. I haven't thought about that. This is we didn't even call it design magazine.
Yeah.
We avoided the term because it's so misleading, or it's so much pointing at that direction.
Right.
Especially because so we avoided the term completely, and then if it's not a design magazine, then it's hard to be a design critical magazine.
Right.
And again, they have to do with kind of poor reputation design magazines. They all focus on appearances and surfaces. So I know that if I would talk, if I would sit next to someone on a plane and ask me what magazine I'm making, and if I tell them a design magazine, they imagine fashion. They imagine the latest product design. And there's no way to explain that. It's design, but different. So we stay away from this. And
that's interesting.
So unfortunately, we have to avoid this term, and it's only when we make a full circle. This magazine, it came with expiry date, and I was always going to make 10 issues. So at the end, we'll kind of reveal that it was a design magazine. Now we can tell, we're trying to kind of define what design is by making it.
Right.
With there has been questions, about. I think critical design was a subject. It was. We were asked a lot about this. We had a talk at the AIGA once, and it was all about being critical.
Yeah.
I studied at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, which is all at the era of Jan van Toorn. It was a lot of Michael Rock was there, and a lot of Sheila. A lot of people who kind of are interested in the social critical aspect of design. So the question inevitably came about, and we didn't know what to do with it. At the end, we kind of always answered from. Saying it is a critical design magazine in a way that we don't include anything which is not worth reporting on.
Right.
Which we actually do with Works at Work as well. So it's fairly easy to be negative in a way in criticism because there's a lot of junk made. But then you kind of perpetuate bad examples. So in both magazines, they're both quite optimistic magazines. They choose examples which we find interesting enough to discuss, and this is a form of criticism as well.
Do you see? Did that kind of way of thinking, has that filtered back in? And I don't mean this question is going to sound overly simplified, and I don't mean it to sound that way. But has that kind of way of thinking about these things filtered back into the work that you're kind of doing in the studio, like your actual kind of just design work? Like for clients and things.
Yes, you consider how you spend your time, and I've been fortunate enough that when I started my design office, and this was in 2001, of course, all of it was commissioned, and I was dependent on what kind of clients and what work I produced, and some was fantastic, some was less good. Today, only about 10% of the output is commissioned.
Oh, wow.
So 90% of work is self-initiated, and it's projects which we create ourselves. This has changed over time.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen spontaneously. We work towards that become more autonomous. And then, if you do a lot less commissioned work, then you become picky about what you do.
Right.
If I take on a client's project, which I'm not interested in, it stops me from doing the work I really want to do myself. So absolutely, you make choices, and there's a lot of things that I don't do because I'm not interested in this, or I don't find it. Again, I'm maybe being conscious of that. If you do these kind of things, you'll get it more often as well. This is always like
Right.
work breeds more work. So yes, and I've seen it happening. Like the more self-commissioned work you do, the more you will kind of be able to do it over time.
Yeah.
So yes, one has to be
Yeah.
careful how he spends time.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was only about 10% client work. Now I imagined it being much
Well,
more
I
equal.
wouldn't know exactly. I don't
Right.
have precise stats. It feels
Right.
like
Right.
this. Maybe it's different from year to year.
Yeah.
It's a marginal thing. Like
Yeah.
most of the day, most of the stuff I spend on things.
Yeah. I didn't realize that. I'm interested, kind of going off of that. I'm interested in you've worked kind of across mediums. Whether it's magazines or web or even things like dance and film. What are the mediums that you're excited about right now, or the kind of formats of distribution that are new that you're really interested in?
Well, it's always the latest that you're dealing with. And lately, I worked on the first film project,
Right.
was a documentary about Bhutan, which has been for the first time worked in film. I haven't, I did small motion videos, but I never worked with documentary.
Right.
Of course, one thing leads to another, so there may be more film documentary projects,
Oh, cool.
and I find it really interesting to again, because it's a medium that breaks even more barriers and it's even more accessible and approachable. Something that I've been keen with works at work, to break the barriers and to find wider readership and to be read by non-designers. So make a design magazine for non-designers. With film, it's even easier to do it because it's so spontaneous. It's so easy to see it. But I think this year and probably part of next year will be dealing a lot more with film. And again,
Oh, wow.
normally it's quite specialized field, but it's very similar work than researching for articles. It's really about telling stories, just in different formats. So
Right.
the pace may be different. Some of the techniques of narration may be different, but there's a lot of common ground, and it feels kind of fine. It doesn't feel awkward that I'm doing something strange, but it feels like it's a natural expansion of what we've done before.
This is a kind of two-part question: how the design field, and then also how the discourse around design how you've seen that change over the course of your career. And so we kind of touched on this a little bit throughout this whole conversation, but kind of being one of the first people to do indie publishing to now kind of working on film and things like social media and things, how has that changed your work and how you kind of think about your work?
I remember, with dot dot dot, we were often asked to kind of label the magazine, what values it represents, and we were always confused by the question. And it came with people who were a bit older than we were, and they wanted to know if this is modern or postmodern or what values represented. And we really kind of it took us off guard. We never thought of it like this. There was never labels put, or there was never some kind of fixed standpoint from which you're writing. And this kind of slowly has disappeared. So while 10, 15 years ago, this has been, people have these stronger positions. Now they don't, and I don't know if it's good or bad. But they kind of removed. So there's a lot of design indeed became business a lot more than any time before. The social media kind of allows reaching public, but because the ease of publishing became also the difficulty because it blurs the boundaries between the different sources. So now a lot more important is to find out who's saying it rather than what is being said.
Right.
While before, anything printed it kind of represented a certain value already, and people kind of did their crochet. With early works, we did a lot of fiction because it seemed to us that something that hasn't been explored, like fiction in design. Today, I wouldn't do it because it could be easily misunderstood. Because there's a lot of things happening on the blog and.
Right.
So again, it's changed. The saturation of publishing changed the field for good. There's a lot of disposable writing and books and things that come and go, and they don't pretend to have any shelf life. It's there now, never again. Serious writing becomes rare because it takes time. It's a lot more difficult, often it needs to be subsidized, it needs to come, be funded by something else, and there's a lot less money in this as well. I remember how I got into when I was starting writing. Robin King was in hyphen, was kind of considered to be kind of a level to aspire to. Today, you don't have these. What is the level to aspire to today? Like I don't find these anymore. It's, with the seriousness of intention and purpose. I would find it more mainstream media. There is some serious journalism outside of design field, but not so much in design field.
I feel like you kind of exactly, like that last answer is exactly why I'm in grad school right now and thinking about all of these things, because I kind of learned about graphic design when I was in high school in the kind of early 2000s, and so that's why ... and those types of things were so influential to my own kind of early design education, and I feel like I just missed the kind of 90s critical theory kind of boom, and have always wondered, is something like that even possible anymore? Where did that go? Like how do you kind of capture that type of deep discourse? Do you think, I don't mean for this to sound so negative or pessimistic, but do you think that type of discourse is possible today? Or how do you fight against that kind of quick, snap judgment, hot take, kind of, quick feedback?
Well, again, I deal with type design, and it's something that it's very cumulative profession. It's building on the past.
Yeah.
And necessarily people ask, like, well, is it possible to make a contribution to the field when so much has been done already, and you kind of just repeating what has been made? And I do think that new possibilities, new technologies, new political situations, all situations can inspire new kind of output as well. So I wouldn't be pessimistic about it. Of course, there is, things. The pace of production is faster than any time before.
Right.
But this is what people always observe. That's like if you look at any newspaper from 200 years ago to 100 years ago to 50 years ago, people always complain about the pace of life and information input, and
right. That's a good point.
To handle. Inevitably, we do the same today in comparison to the previous decades. But I think that this new situation can be inspiration. And we see that people are genuinely interested in transparency of anything. People are interested in where things are coming from. These hipsters, whatever it may mean, but actually care about what coffee they drink, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing that that there's a story behind objects. That you care what kind of jeans you wear and who makes them, and while before you didn't care. Now you want to feel good about it, how they produced and who made it. So this kind of stories behind things and knowledge and information about there's a lot more knowledge about it. I basically know everything which I eat. Whatever it comes from, who makes it, and which in the past, it was unthinkable. Coffee was a coffee. You never kind of thought about where the beans are coming from. Today, probably the individual farmer who collected the beans and what happened, how they traveled to you, and So I think these are very positive things, that you start understanding the world, how it operates. And I think these are very positive improvements.
Yeah, my last question is actually kind of related to that. I'm curious, you had mentioned that kind of outside of design there is a lot of kind of good journalism and rich discourse. I'm curious kind of who are you reading right now, or what is the kind of media that you're consuming right now that's influencing how you think about the work you're doing outside of design? Who are the people or the books, or what are those types of things that you're looking to right now?
It's too bad I cannot point to piles of books I have on my desk. I have a very long desk and piles of books. And one of the reasons why Works at Work will have a break is that I didn't have so much time to read lately. I mean, I'm a very avid reader, and I read enormously. But Works at Work was such a labor-intense project that I stopped reading for pleasure. I was reading a lot of work-related stuff. I read a lot of fiction. I don't remember when was the last time I read fiction books, because everything is now concerning research and work that I'm doing, but a lot less time to just kind of read, because I really feel like I discover a new author.
Yeah.
Having said that, I always I receive a lot of design-related publications, and a lot of my shelves I would have up there. I would have like an old idea magazine there, and then it would be iMagazine in another corner, and but what the only I received them because people were generous enough and kind enough to send it to me. But the only magazine I subscribe to is National Geographic.
Oh wow.
And New Yorker.
Okay.
These are the only two magazines I'm actually paying for. And I think that's important to see, like what you pay for. I usually value a lot more.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I'm in a unique position that I'm so lucky that people send me design magazines for free. So it's I don't know if it's fair to compare this. But then, I read all kind of things. And of course, I read daily papers. There's an established Dutch daily which I read. I read New York Times.
Okay.
I think some of the writing there is amazing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's great to kind of see. Unfortunately, this is being recorded audio, so no one else can see it. But I love seeing that kind of bookshelf behind you, and it makes sense. Through kind of all of your work.
I don't want to stage this as a kind of it's very common to have interviews in front of books. This is not staged to impress with the quantity of books. And in a way, this is good that this is audio only.
Right.
Because, these are tools, and they just have to. Unfortunately, books take a lot of shapes, a lot of space. It's amazing. If I think that I moved to Holland with this one suitcase, and now I would need, probably a couple of shipping containers to get my stuff from place to place, because of books mainly, and most of them I actually did read.
I love that.
There's a relationship with books.
I love that. I know I said that was the last question. I have one more. That has one more quick question that I would love to ask you, because so much of your work, and it's probably being a type design. I don't want to make a judgment, but being a type designer and being a writer, so much of your work is based in text, and so doing this film to me seems much more visual. And I know you've done things kind of related to dance, and you do other image things, but would you say text is still primarily your comfortable mode of communication?
Absolutely, it's easiest to present. I do work with text. And the different facets, different aspects of text. Yes, it's true.
How is that kind of that knowledge and that background translated into working on things like film and things where it's less text based?
Well, like the film started with writing scripts. Like,
Yeah, you're right.
the whole Bhutan film was like basically I spent a couple of months researching, writing, no, first the ideas what to report on, and then trying to find a coherent way
Right.
to write it. So at the end, it was more writing than any time before, a lot more. And the actual editing of video, and I found it quite easy actually, because once you know what you're doing, like it's like you have an article and they trying to find illustrations. Um, this is how we work. I work with a cinematographer I share the office with, who you can hear in the background. He's just discussing his project now.
Oh.
And I guess I did write the script, and then together we kind of considered like how to find a visual narrative, because you need a different pace, and like it cannot be just
Right.
someone reading. So you need to find a different way how to tell the story, which we're still learning. I don't know enough about the techniques how to do it in film.
Right.
I've never studied film. I was quite nervous actually about, we did a private preview and I invited friends who work with video because we are so kind of intimidated by a new field that, that we're curious to see like how they see it. And it's a lot more dense than other films. Usually things such as kind of flowing here is kind of like it's probably should have been longer and put a lot more kind of breathing material.
Interesting.
And I think this is what we're learning because because I used to work with substance.
Right.
I didn't know I felt uncomfortable to using just filler material.
Yeah.
But it seems like film needs it, to emphasize the emotions and to bring the viewer from place to place. So that's something that we still need to master.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think that's a great way to actually wrap it up, and I know you have to kind of get back to work, and I just want to thank you for your time. This was so interesting. Your work has been so influential to me, and I know you're kind of harsh on ... now, but I was one of those design students who stumbled across it and was very influential in my own development as a designer and how I think about a lot of these things even today. So, I really, I'm honored that I could have, had this time to talk to you, and I thought this was so interesting.
Sorry for ruining the impression. I probably Stuart would be better to speak to. You would be more positive. I was like, I found it going back to it. You're being teleported at times that the reason what you do today is always like a reaction to your previous work and
Right.
What you learn. And, so going back in time feels like you're just seeing the mistakes. You're not seeing the good things. But
Right.
there are actually some of the positive things.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and I'm excited to see kind of what you do next. I've been following your work for a while, and just kind of love what you do and how you think about these things. So it was great, kind of great to talk to you and to have you a part of this.
Thank you, and good luck with your own studies. And I'm curious to see what you do with all that and where it's going to lead.
This episode was recorded on March 14th, 2017. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.